One Sunday morning, everything was going fine in church. Everything was going as expected, when suddenly, in a big cloud of smoke, right in the middle of the sanctuary, the devil himself appeared. And when the congregation saw who it was, they just panicked, and everybody started to run for every door, every exit they could find to get out of there as quickly as they could. And within a matter of just a few moments, the sanctuary was entirely empty, except for one little old man who was sitting by himself back there in the pew, who had his arms crossed like this, and he just wasn't going to move. And the devil walked back to him and he says, "Do you know who I am?" And the man says, "Yes, I think I do." And the devil said, "Well, aren't you afraid of me?" And the old man said, "No, not really." And the devil was really puzzled because everybody's afraid of the devil. And he said in a quieter voice, "Well, can you tell me why you're not afraid of me?" And the old man says, "Well, it's like this. I've been married to your sister for the last 31 years. All of us and you can flip that joke and make it a little old lady who's sitting back there, who's been married to the devil's brother for the past 31 years. All of us know to some degree what it means to be in a family that has its dysfunctional parts. The parts of our families that don't work so well. When our families hit critical times and it seems like all of the problems emerge and all the challenges are suddenly there, and the solutions, if there are any, are hard to find. I couldn't help but think of family yesterday morning when I heard the news about the shooting in Tucson of Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords and at least 10 or 12 others, 6 of whom are deceased. I couldn't help but think of how fragile our whole country is at times when something like this happens that points out divisions that may be deeper than any of us suspect. We know some of the basic facts of what happened yesterday. We know that a 22-year-old young man by the name of Jared Lee, what was his Lochner, that's it. Jared Lee Lochner walked up behind the Congresswoman and raised a gun, and some accounts said it was a pistol, some accounts say it was a semi-automatic weapon, and from about a foot away from her, at the back of her head, he fired a single shot that we know now went entirely through the brain. And when she collapsed immediately, he just kept firing into the crowd. And one of the ironies is that a judge, a well-known judge, controversial judge, who had been attending Mass at the Catholic Church across the street, had come out of Mass and seen a friend of his in this crowd and had just walked over and just happened to be there, and he was killed. And then we know that a 9-year-old girl was killed named Christina. Those of us who are Dodgers fans may have read in this morning's LA Times that this 9-year-old girl is the daughter of one of the scouts for the Dodgers. And she had just been elected to the student government of her elementary school. And so she wanted to meet her congresswoman. And she went on behalf of the student body. And there she was, 9 years old, and a bullet takes away her life. Her grandfather was Dallas Green, who was the manager of the Philadelphia Phillies when they won the World Series in 1980. Her family has a long history of sports connections, and she was the only girl on a Little League baseball team in Tucson. Last night, Frank McCourt released a statement on behalf of the Dodgers that said that we've lost somebody in our family. We've lost somebody who was dear to us, who is no more, who is suddenly gone. What we don't know is what motivated Jared Lee Lochner to take this action. We know he was a loner. We know that he was very shy. We know that other students reported to the community college that he attended that his behavior was so strange that last fall the administration contacted his parents and asked them to come in and told them that they thought that their son needed psychiatric help. When the young man heard that, he dropped out of school and he began to post videos on YouTube. He never appears himself in these videos, but his voice is heard as a text scrolls on a black screen, and he is angry about a whole host of things. He's angry about our currency, the gold standard. He's angry about government brainwashing and control and spying on the citizens. He's angry about immigration. He's angry about why, as a country, all of us are not required to speak the English language and have correct grammar. He's angry about a whole host of things. And while people saw that he was disturbed and bothered, I don't think that there were any of them who thought that he could take this kind of action. Well, it's caused shockwaves to go through the nation. The last time a congressperson was killed was in 1989, and it happens very rarely. And because it happens very rarely, the Secret Service never guards these congressmen and women unless there are a series of threats against their lives. They sort of take it for granted that they can go to a town meeting in a shopping center, as she did, and that there will be a safe environment. But people from every direction had something to say about what had gone on yesterday. People on the left and on the right. People on the right were quick to point out that they had checked their registry for the Tea Party and that this young man was not a registered member of the Tea Party or had a known political affiliation. People on the left were quick to jump in and say, well, you know, the rhetoric from the right has been so hot and heavy that he is reacting to things that he heard or saw. And the whole story of Sarah Palin's image that appeared on her website last fall about the gun scope that was on several targeted House districts in the House of Representatives. One of those districts that Sarah Palin targeted was this district. And some say that that may have led some unstable person. Well, we don't know. We don't know. People have theories. But what was comforting to me was to see that people on both the left and the right condemned the violence. They all said, there's no place for that within our country. Well, why should I bring this up in a sermon in church, you might ask? Diana Butler Bass is an independent commentator on religion in America, and she's one of the most sought-after speakers around. She recalls a story about her husband's family in 1968. They were members of a Presbyterian church, and right after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, they went to church the following Sunday to see what their pastor would say. And Diana Butler Bass writes that as the pastor began the sermon, everyone got very quiet, hoping to hear something that would bring them comfort or understanding or insight, something, even a prayer, to hold them together. But to the astonishment of almost the entire congregation, the pastor didn't reference the assassination of Martin Luther King in any respect. He said nothing about it. And there was a sense among the congregation when the service came to a close that an opportunity had been missed to pull together and pray for one another and for the fabric of the nation. Ms. Bass points out that her family didn't stay long at that church. They were moderate people right in the middle, and they didn't expect their pastor to say this or that, to be on one side or the other, but what they wanted to hear was their pastor to say something about an event that had disturbed and upset so many people. She writes, "If the church is silent in the wake of events that startle and shake us up, then the church loses an important moment to proclaim the love of God for all of God's children, no matter who they are." Sociologists who look at the attendance of mainline Christian denominations, the Protestants and the Catholics, look at statistics about attendance, and it was in 1970 that church attendance among mainline churches began to decline, and it has continued to do so for 40 years. Why 1970? Well, they think that it's because of the Vietnam War, because that was one of the most controversial years of the war. And there were people who weren't sure what to say, and most of the ministers and most churches didn't say anything. The church was quiet about the ethics and the morality of this situation, not even bringing it up to the congregation so they could discuss the pros and cons of military action in Southeast Asia. There was no mention of it. The church just wanted things to stay calm. And sociologists suggest that as a result, a whole generation of young people got turned off to the church because they wanted to hear the church say something about the issues of the day. You know, you can debate about what the something is, but they wanted the church to be relevant and not hiding from what's on the headlines of the morning paper. Well, a whole generation dropped out of church, and when that generation got married a few years later in the 70s and began to have children into the 80s, they didn't bring their children back to church with them. And a whole gap in 20th century Christianity is noted by this big drop of a whole generation and all of the repercussions of that, the absence of this generation from church. All because, perhaps, of silence. Diana Butler Bass says the church cannot afford to be silent. The church must respond to everything that happens in joy, but also in tragedy.